Comments. If you're a member of the audience here tonight wishing to offer comment, please step to the podium and give us your name and city of residence. All right, seeing none, we will move to general manager's update. And George.
You want to check?
Oh shoot.
Somebody.
So if you're on the Zoom meeting, use the raise your hand function there. Seeing nobody there, we will move to general manager's report. George.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
My first meeting of the year.
Yeah.
I haven't been. You guys probably haven't noticed that I've been gone. Thanks to Kevin for sitting in for me and taking care of all the meetings and everything. Appreciate that. I do have an update. I've been going for a while, so I'll update you on some things that are going on right now. I missed the last meeting because I was with a group of staff and commissioners from the PUD Association. We went to Washington, DC to meet with legislators and discuss some important issues. And so the meetings were successful. The trip was successful, I think, as a whole. Met with a lot of senators and representatives, talked about a lot of the issues regarding water and power, since PUD Association handles both. Specifically with water, one of the big things we talked about was the assistance program, LIWAP, the Low Income Housing and Water Assistance Program. So that was a program. We talked to a lot of representatives about this because it was a program that was implemented at the start of COVID to help people with their utility bills. And it's a temporary program. It's set to expire this year with no more funding. It's runs parallel with the LIHEAP program, which is the energy assistance program. And that's getting continued funding, and that's going on. We, based on the numbers that Brian had, in the last 3 years, we've had remarkable increase in the number of customers using that program. We've got, I think, over 400 people that have used it. So they are counting on that money coming from that LIWAP program through community action. So we went to lobby for them to continue funding that. We got a lot of good response, and we're hoping that they make it a permanent program, just like the LIHEAP program. It's the same energy bills, water bills, it's all a part of the increased cost of living for a lot of people. So we did lobby for that. In addition, just funding in general for infrastructure improvements, whether they're state revolving fund loans that come down to the state, grant programs, utility relocations, a lot of those kinds of things, we lobbied for those. And then the one interesting thing I learned about, which thankfully doesn't impact us right now and hopefully ever, but PFAS. So the forever chemicals that are in water. Learned a couple of things when I was in DC and things that we discussed with legislators. As a water or wastewater utility responsible for cleaning up and treating PFAS, if you go then to dispose of that somewhere, you also become a polluter. And that site becomes basically a Superfund site, which it baffles your mind when you think about it, because we're being regulated to clean it up, but then we are also subject to be part of the litigation on the pollution side if we go and dispose of it somewhere. So there is a bill, and I can get you, it's a federal bill, I can get you the number. I have copies of it in my office as well. But there's a bill being proposed to exempt water and wastewater utilities from all of that, which it makes too much sense to not do it. That doesn't mean it'll happen. Senator Murray was surprised to hear about it. She wasn't aware. Senator Cantwell also wasn't aware of it. So we feel like we made a lot of traction with our state contingent. So we're hoping that continues. Like I said, it doesn't affect us right now. We've tested what we need to test. We're fine. but it impacts a lot of other PUDs throughout the state that have to deal with the treatment. So they don't have the money to treat it. And then they become all of a sudden a polluter when they have to dispose of it. So it seems really unfair. So that was an interesting piece of information I gathered when I was there. Comments or questions just on that before I move on?
What are the rulemakings on PFAS that state that you are then in turn responsible and a polluter on the other end? If you could find that,
I don't think there's
Personally-
anything specific that
there's
makes you one. It's just the site turns into a Superfund site, which is governed by a different law. And so anybody polluting
that location.
becomes a part of the problem. And so that was written in, there's an acronym, CERCLA, I think, something like that. I can get you that information. It's already in place.
Yeah.
It's already a law. And so us
It just is.
doing what we
is
need to do, we become part of it.
Implicated because
Yeah.
Assuming this was something that came about prior to everything coming out with
Yes.
PFAS.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this started 30, 40, 50 years ago. I'm
Right.
not sure when
Got it.
Superfund sites started popping up and needing remediation. And then they started looking for, well, who's going to pay for it? And then that's when, you look for the people that actually create the pollution. And so they would go after them. But unless they change the existing law, we become a party to the litigation. Yeah. Should I stop there? No.
I was just gonna say, I thought with we'd escaped unfunded mandates from Olympia, only to get slapped with one that's sneaking up on us. Well, thank you for staying on top of that. Certainly.
I'll send you the information so you have it, especially on that new bill. But I'll go the other way and I'll give you some good news. So the state capital budget came out last week. It hasn't been signed by the governor yet, but we are included as a line item for utility relocation for Olson Creek.
Brilliant.
So 39th district,
wow.
Senator Wagner and, and those there, they arranged to get our line item in there on the Senate budget. So that's really good. On a short session, limited budget, we have it in there. So as long as the governor doesn't veto the budget, we should get some additional money for utilities. That's a good thing.
Great.
Let's see, I'm working on a fire hydrant maintenance agreement. So we had Big Lake Fire Department approach us and want something similar to what we've been doing with Cedar Valley and Mount Vernon. So I'm working on that. Talk about projects briefly. So just had the tour of the new building. So hopefully that was informative. It turned out to be a good day. So it actually continued with the tour. Hopefully you got update and got something out of the tour. So thanks to Sam and Mike Benton and everybody, Mark, for leading the tour. Everything looked good over there. It's nice to see the walls go in and then see the size and scale of how big it's going to be. The aqua room is basically the same square footage as this. It's just much higher ceiling, so it looks a lot different. But I'm glad you got a chance to go over there and see that. See, we're starting on one of our other utility relocation projects on Highway 20. So that's kicking off soon, as well as the Alger relocation. That's doing some preliminary work there, and hopefully that'll get going here shortly. And then our two water
Is this
line,
the I-5 one?
the I-5 one, yeah. There's some work, we're doing some utility location work and then DOTs there as well, identifying stuff, so hopefully that'll get going this summer. We've got our two pipeline projects over at the Country Club in West Mount Vernon that are moving along. The SRD transformer, so I need to update you on that. So that emergency declaration is still in place. And we're expecting the last of the improvements to happen next week. So at that point, the next meeting, we should be able to cancel the emergency. So I want to leave that in place just to make sure we didn't need anything else, but it should happen next week. And then the goal is to turn on pumps at the SRD April 1st. Build a reservoir.
Have we been able to divert any water from these last few rain events?
Yeah, we have. Mike's nodding his head, so we've gotten some. It's still low. It's not as, we are not as high as we normally are this time of year, just from the lack of rainfall over the last 6 months. And the drought from last year, actually. So that's it for my manager's update, and then Alistair's gonna go next. Unless you have any questions.
Not for me.
Nothing?
For me.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having me give the update. And I'm happy to see so many people interested in the workings of IT at PUD. So since we last met, I wanted to talk a little bit about some updates we've made to cybersecurity, talk about our Starlink implementation, and give you some progress with SkagitNet. So towards the end of the year last year, we had some penetration testing done. And based on that pen test, we've taken some steps to do some really immediate remediations to it to secure everything. I think the results from the pen test came that we're actually doing fairly well. But there are some things that we needed to tighten up. We have been doing that, and we're now on the lower end of those critical, or not critical, but on the lower suggested things to be rectified. We have been, and we're getting a little bit stronger with our vulnerability management. With Qualys that handles our server end, and Clarity that's handling the SCADA end. We're really getting a good sense of the inventory that's out there, what needs to be really looked at, and actually we're starting to develop more of a hardware replacement cycle on the SCADA end that we really haven't looked at before. So far, it's always been, oh, when it goes away, then we replace it. And what we want to do is try to be a little bit more proactive in how we go about doing that. And then finally, we really haven't had any IT specific policies or standards in place. We've got some developed. They're going through review right now. And hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be able to present something for you to look at and to give some approval over. So Starlink, this started with Saratoga. The tank that's up there, we had no real way of getting communications. There's no internet access, and the cell signal out there was really poor. So what we initially did probably 2 years ago was we put HughesNet, a satellite out there. We looked at Starlink when I first got here, but it was prohibitively expensive initially. Recently, the prices have gone down. We're looking at about $140 a month for a 40 megabyte stream. And like I said, I'll show you where it is and what it looks like at Saratoga. Right now, that little device there, that's sitting out at Eaglemont. The service has proven to be so good when we put it out there. We get really good steady communication that it's something that we're starting to consider in other places. And so it's really good satellite communication, especially in those areas where we're not getting any fiber or anything and the cell transmission is spotty. This is proving to be a really good alternative for us. And like I said, we've got it now. It's in use at Saratoga and Eaglemont. It's being ready for use to hook into the SCADA system. And if you see right here, that's where we've got it on top of the tank out at Saratoga. And that's going a little bit choppier than we thought, but it's getting. And I want to thank Mark for his crew and going out there and getting drone pictures of it for us. And finally, SkagitNet, we're almost there. We're almost there. We have 2 sites, the PRV here on Josh Wilson and this section here at Jensen Lane. It's all connected and ready to go. What we are just waiting for right now are to get the optics and the equipment in their hut that will tie us directly into here. So we're just really waiting for some equipment, and then we'll finally have our first actual assets connected to Skagit.net. So that should be coming. I would have hoped by the time we had this meeting that it would be done, but again, we're just waiting for those parts. And then secondarily, we've already had discussions with the port, and we're looking at the Bayview tank right here and the Bow Hill section up there that are going to be our next projects that we think we can get Skagit.net onto once we get the first ones connected, and we'll see how they operate, make sure they run. And then that will just eliminate some services that we're already paying for, and it'll all be internal. We'll light it up ourselves, and hopefully we'll have really good, solid communications piece. And once we get the first ones down, I got a feeling the next ones will come a heck of a lot quicker. We'll know exactly what we're doing and how we get everything connected. And that's it. Questions?
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you.
All right, awesome.
Comment just to add to Alistair's presentation. Skagit.net. So just information, I think Sarah's gonna be here to give an update probably in the next month or so. Possibly April, I think, late April possibly, so. That's something to look forward to, and we're right now trying to schedule another broadband work group meeting. So we had a big length of time where we haven't had one, and so things have changed, and there's going to be an update on a lot of the funding that was requested. You know, we applied for a lot of the state broadband funding, and so I don't know if those decisions have been made yet, but Sarah will come and update us. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Good. All right, so next up is new business. This is the temporary water rights transfer. George, are you
Yeah.
gonna introduce that?
I will. So yes, this is a big topic. And got some people here to talk to this item. In the packet, there's a memo and there's a draft contract, and I'll get to just providing the context and the background and talking about some of the terms that are in that draft contract. So I'm going to go through that. Just before we get started, so we've got the table set up this way, and hopefully the commission's okay with it. But as we start a conversation, there's people at the tables that might have some valuable input or provide comments, or you might want to ask questions of. So they're seated up front just to make that simpler. The people that you probably don't know, there's Casey Sleichler's here. She's the section manager for the Water Resources Program for the Northwest region. So that's our regulator. And then Jen is here from the consortium as well. And you should know everybody else. So a bit of background. 4 times in the last 9 years, we've completed temporary water rights transfers to the districts, 15 and 22, because of declared droughts. We've waited for that action to take place, and then we've done the transfers. There's a lot of effort from a lot of people in doing those transfers. And usually time is of the essence because a drought's been declared, the ditches are dry, we haven't had rain in a long time, so there's a lot of things going on at the same time. But they happen because we acknowledge that the transfers are really important to the community. They're important to the irrigators, the agriculture community, and we have an asset that they can use to help that continue. So we all agree that it's important to do, and so that's why we've done it 4 times in the last 9 years. But every time we do it, we talk about how to make that process simpler and easier. One, by either doing the transfers ahead of time so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. And then the other one is looking at doing it for more than just one season at a time. So over the last few months, we've been working towards those goals. And so that's what we want to talk to everyone and talk to the board about tonight. Recently, we've discussed our internal ideas and our draft contracts with internal staff, with our consultants, with the Department of Ecology, and we've learned a few things. So where we're at now is that just the acknowledgement that doing a multi-year agreement to allow transfers to happen when there's not a declared drought is our goal. That's one of our goals. We'd like to do that. We are currently in a drought. We're still in the drought from last year. So the processes for transfers during each of those conditions are a little bit different. I think in a non-drought transfer, it could take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to run the process and do the transfer. During a drought, it's a lot more efficient. It could take up to 2 weeks, so it can happen quicker. So while we were thinking about how to do this in advance and how to do it longer term to save us some time, we actually think the most efficient way is to pull it apart and look at this year separately from what may happen in the future. So our recommendation is to look at a drought-related transfer for this year. This is early, right? It's March, way earlier than we normally do it. And if we can get that in place, it's early in the season, we can get that accomplished, and then we can turn our attention to the non-drought transfer, which can happen for future years. So we thought pulling it apart would be more efficient and better use of our time. It'll also allow the water to be transferred earlier to be able to use this year. So for the agreement that we would do, there's one with ecology, like I just talked about, doing the change authorization. So we're recommending doing that one for this year, and then looking at future transfers with a different change authorization. So that's just the background where we're at today, and we can talk about each of those scenarios and ask for comments and provide input. I just want to discuss the agreement that's in place. So if we were to look at a transfer for this year, we tried to create a draft agreement that's kind of the foundation of what this agreement would look like, and even ones in the future may look like. So there's a draft agreement in the packet, and I think everybody's looked at it, hopefully, but I'm not going to cover every single term in there. I want to discuss just some of the highlights of the terms that are in there. And some of them are different from when we've done previous transfers. So the big things are that the allowable pumping period for the irrigators, we're proposing to be much wider, from May 15th to October 1st. So much longer pumping period to allow more efficient use of the water. It doesn't contain any pumping restrictions based on tidal conditions. So previous 4 transfers, we've had restrictions on pumping around a high tide. So those are not included in here. We are proposing a water transfer fee. So, something that incorporates all the things that we need to worry about and think about and reimburse for the transfer. And the water transfer fee is, we've rounded it to $5,000, and that includes the administration of the transfers and the data that we get. There's a prorated cost for water meter and telemetry that the PUD would be responsible for. And I'll get back to and talk about that in more detail in a second. And then it also includes in that fee 300 acre-feet of water. So for the simple fee, $5,000, the admin, the metering that we're responsible for installing, removing, calibrating, all of that, and 300 acre-feet of water, which is roughly about how much irrigators have used in previous seasons. So we tried to simplify that and make it one fee, payable before the transfer happens.
And is that per district or per the consortium?
So it would be per district for one diversion. If you add a diversion, it requires additional metering equipment, so there would be an additional $1,000 if you add a diversion onto that. So if you had 2 diversions, it would be $6,000.
But still a cumulative 300 acre-feet between the 2 diversions.
Correct. Yeah. So to get to the metering question. So as I understand it, we know that the irrigators and a lot of customers are already required to meter for their own water right. And they're either in the process of installing a meter or have already installed a meter. And that's great. They're responsible for that equipment, for making sure it operates. And they're responsible for reporting on their water right, and that's all in their responsibility. For the same reasons, for similar reasons, we'd like to have our metering equipment on there as well, or in place of. We're not picky about that. This would be a meter that is a part of a program that we're trying to develop. So if we develop this program of temporary water rights transfers, it may be customers other than the districts 15 and 22. We may have other customers as a part of that program. We'd like to make the metering consistent, so that customers know what to expect, and it's technology and telemetry that we are responsible for, are in control of. It makes it simpler on our end. I understand that there might be redundant metering. That's obviously what may happen. But at the end of the day, it's metering that we would be responsible for, just like all of our other customers. We have meters for every one of our other metered customers, and we're responsible for making sure it operates, it's calibrated, maintained, and we get the data from it. So that's what we would propose for this as well.
Quick question, is that meter gonna be installed from only May 15th through the October
Yeah.
date? Or can they opt to have if say another agreement has been signed, can the meter stay there and they don't have to pay it?
We can talk about that. That's something we can work out. The intent would be just for the
For the
irrigating
period of time.
season when they're have approval to use our water right.
Well, then there's the ease and integrity of reporting to ecology based on a common infrastructure, right? Reporting methods.
Yeah,
That's
there's
what's different about our existing, if we don't necessarily.
right. We just accumulate the data and we bill off of it. In this case, you're right. There's going to be data. We have no problem giving people access to the telemetry in our meter. It's not that we want to hoard that data and not show it to anybody. It's just that we want to be in control of making sure that it works.
But we have a lot of stakeholders that are interested in the specific data and.
Yeah. It may be duplicate data, but at the end of the day, again, it's our program, in setting it up from the beginning means we don't have to change something later if we're just consistent with it. So that's how I would approach the metering question. Let's see. There's a number of other terms and clauses in the draft contract, which we can comment on and have feedback. There's a clause for interruption of service. We based May 15th and October 1st on typical times when we could reduce our pumping down to a maximum of 2 pumps. There may be conditions that we don't know about yet where we may need to pump more. And so there is something in there about limiting or reducing or eliminating pumping altogether, depending on our operational needs. But it would require a declaration of an emergency from the board. It's not just an arbitrary decision.
Other
Yes.
question too about the drought transfer versus a year-round transfer or non-drought transfer.
No.
In a drought transfer, say that the state of the drought is no longer declared, and that's the only basis in which we transferred that water right. So say all of a sudden, for some random reason, we get a bunch of rain and we're no longer in a drought. Wishful thinking, but say that does happen, does that invalidate that transfer as soon as the drought is no longer declared?
I think you looked at the right person to answer that
I was
question,
like,
because it's not me.
Would you like me to?
Yes, I would like
Yes,
to
that'd
know.
be great.
First of all, thanks for having me today. I appreciate being a part of the conversation. It's something we, as ecology, are really excited about and something we've been hoping could come together. So thanks for including us in that conversation. So I would say there's several options. Before we proceeded with a drought transfer for this summer, we would need drought to be declared, and right now it ends in June. If we are very fortunate and we get a bunch of snow, there's a potential that we could not, authorize it under our drought authorization. However, we can proceed with a 1-year seasonal transfer That's not a problem. We just need a little bit of extra time. We need to do a public notice that has some requirements in terms of publishing time and providing opportunity for public comment. That's really, an added 6 weeks.
Could both be filed at the same time? So say there's an urgent need under the current drought conditions to have that water through June. And then a year transfer be submitted while we're waiting to find out, because I mean, that's my concern is say we give this transfer. June happens, randomly we get a lot of rain, and then say we have a state of emergency for drought conditions again in August, or there's some sort of interruption in that drought condition.
I appreciate that.
That we want to make sure that we're covered and that we don't have, again, we're back to having interruptible water rights situation where we lose crops and all that.
I think if we can so to your answer, yes, we could do that. I think we can simplify it. And if we know that you're gonna move ahead with the transfer and in the next few weeks, we can get an application in. I expect it'll be substantially similar to previous year's applications. So it should be pretty easy to complete. We will have plenty of time to get that processed and in place by irrigation.
Oh, great. Okay.
So I just want to let you know, it doesn't have to be today or last month that we had it in. Soon would be helpful.
Okay. That's good to know.
But we can get coverage one way or the other, or both, if really that becomes.
I think Bill has a question. I just want to maybe rephrase the question.
Sure.
Also, maybe cover a different point. So if in the next month, we are able to accomplish or submit a change authorization under the drought, would you approve it, or could you approve it for our timeline from May 15th to October 1st? And what if in the middle of that, the drought is?
I don't think we have ever quite, that I'm aware of, been in that situation. So if I would probably check back with our legal on that situation, but if we were even thinking that might be a case, I don't know if there is a reason not to just do a standard seasonal transfer, as long as it works for the PUD.
And that would be our goal, is to get the drought application submitted fairly quickly, because we've done it before. And then move right into the seasonal transfer, non-drought transfer, just because we know we're gonna work that way.
And I'll add just one more thing, just because this came up in a conversation Bill and I had last week. And just to be clear, what the PUD and ecology do in terms of the seasonal transfer or drought transfer can be decoupled from whatever agreement is reached with the PUD and the water users. So, for example, you may have a multi-year agreement. You can still just come to ecology for a single seasonal transfer. So those can be different from one another, and that's, they don't have to be connected.
Right. I neglected to mention that, but before I talk on that, Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a comment, not a question. Based on, we weren't real clear, and that Casey helped clarify this just now with what the options would be currently. And with that information, that it would seem to be the best route to pursue the non-drought seasonal now and get that in place. And if something happened and you always have the drought to fall back on.
Mhm.
If it does.
If we can backstop, I wouldn't want to do it without a backstop. And so whatever that backstop looks like, and because we're trying to provide some certainty to the irrigators to be able to say, we're not going to let our administrative timing or some kind of a sync that are going across the complexity of the organizations to be able to say, hey, guess what? You don't get to irrigate for the next 2 weeks because we didn't get a paperwork done in time. So that's what's great about having the non-seasonal backstop in place. If there is a drought, that's great. And if it gets just to be able to flow from one set of permissions to another, if it means doing a little bit more work in March, and I would be in favor of that, especially if you know it's coming. Right? Nobody's tied anything. We've got everything aligned, and better do that now. In June.
And I'll just say our goal is really to help facilitate getting the water where we legally can get it. Whatever works for you. I know George was kind enough to denote we're the regulator, which we are, but we're also trying to get water legally where we can get it for really important reasons such as agriculture in the valley.
What day in June does the drought expire?
I knew you would ask me that. I will look that up. It's either the 1st or the 30th.
I was looking at that earlier today too, and I didn't.
Yeah, I'll have to go back to the original order that the governor signed to take a look at that.
So can I make a comment? It seems like proceeding with the drought is the fastest way to get to the May 15th. And then immediately following that, apply for the non-drought. So that if for some reason the 2023 drought expires in June, we have that other agreement to fall back on. Is that?
Yeah, it would trigger, that's what I said, it was like.
Yeah, I would think we would
Automatically trigger, but we
wanna
could say we're gonna go from one set of agreements to another one. In order
Start
to defend
pursuing
our
it.
consents.
So maybe there needs to be something in the final agreement that explains that transition. So we
So-
have an understanding of how it's.
Yeah, and so what Casey was saying is, something I didn't mention, but yeah, there's the applications to ecology, which we can decide which one we want to do. It's likely gonna be on a year-by-year basis, depending on how they process it. But between the PUD and the districts or whatever customers we have, yeah, we have the option of signing a multi-year agreement. We just may not have the definition of what the future terms and conditions are. So there's some risk in that, or we may decide just to do 1-year agreements just to make it simple. We can figure that out. The draft agreement that's in the packet, I think talks about multi-year. But just leaving it vague for future years and we fill in the blank. So the intent is to show our commitment to working on a multi-year agreement. And if we just did a single year, it doesn't mean we're not planning to do more.
George, I think we have an interlocal between PD and the consortium.
In general, we do, yes. Yeah, we would work under that, yeah. After all my comments, I was gonna turn it over to you, Jenna, see if you had any comments for me, just about the agreement and the background and all that.
Yeah, I'd like to just thank you on behalf of the 2 districts for working over this over the winter, prioritizing it. I think not having title conditions is huge. Everybody I've talked to is shocked and happy and excited about this new agreement. We've read the agreement and have already provided comments to George, which are largely incorporated into what you're looking at with no concerns, the dates, the format of the agreement. I think there's 2 things, but one of them is really easy. On the first bullet, I think with the bullets in your memo, just making clear that it's 5,000 fee for each district, and then the additional diversions are $1,000 extras. There's a little bit of inconsistency.
Okay.
But the real key thing is the monitoring and metering. And so the districts had some pragmatic concerns before we sign on to this. The districts are looking at also installing meters with telemetry for the 2024 irrigation season. They have a meeting set up at the end of March with Farm HQ, which is a fairly well-known, they have monitors and telemetry data packages that you can customize, and a lot of our irrigators already have Farm HQ on their reels. And so there's huge incentive to having people using the same technology so that we can start databases. How much is the district providing? How much are different reels using? And they're really willing to make that investment. So George had mentioned that there will be duplicative, potentially metering systems. And if there was a way to have a conversation with the PUD technicians, have them come out to the Farm HQ meeting, look at the meters that we're either retrofitting or purchasing, look at if the data package is customizable to meet PUD's needs, that we could maybe avoid the extra expenses. And it's not for sure yet. We recognize that you guys definitely have needs to collect and maintain your own data. But from the district's perspective, there's some technical issues. There was one question about having to throttle down to get through a PD meter. that would impact district operations. And then there was another concern, about how to turn the PUD meter on and off, because we wouldn't want a PUD meter reading if they're pumping to a district water right, for example, and avoiding some confusion there. So I really like the idea of the fee up to a 300,000 acre feet, because that seems to address some of the billing issues. But just, that's something that the districts are gonna wanna get nailed down before the final agreement is signed, so that everyone's on the same page in terms of metering and reporting. And otherwise, there's no additional comments on the agreement.
Mark's our metering expert, because he's been dealing a lot with this issue for the last few weeks, so I've already said my piece on the meter. I don't know if you have anything additional to offer on the metering part.
I don't, I mean, we looked at a couple of different options. We thought about some of those restrictions as well. We considered using a mag meter or an ultrasonic meter that has, no friction in it. The problem with that is they, without a pipe full condition, they give some reads that aren't always correct, and then we would need to put some sort of friction element in there so that we could ensure a full pipe diameter to measure. But the meters that we have looked at, and we did go on a tour of the facilities last year to look at the meters and see some of the pumping equipment that was out there. The meters that we have looked at and we're selecting for this are equivalent to the meters that are out there already. I think, there's a 8-inch turbo meter that we would be putting on the same thing as what you have, or exchange it. And it would come with a cellular read that would provide us with the data that we need in the format that we're used to, and that we can manipulate into a report the way that's consumable for everyone. And I understand the concern about shutting off the PUD meter when it's just your water right. Of course, that's valid. We could look at a bypass. I think that's difficult, because then we risk when is it being bypassed, when is it not being bypassed. What we had put in our program was that particularly when there's in future years, we're looking at 5, year 3, 4, 5, when we have a program that's available to everybody in a generic form, and we're not going for separate allocations every year. But and when you could be pumping outside of the in-stream flow rule, I don't know if that's something that would be valuable for you or not. It might be valuable for another customer to pump our water right in addition to their water right. And so, from an aggregation standpoint, then you can just read that off of one meter and make sure that we're still within the instantaneous flow that is the limit. So from that standpoint, it's nice to have one meter, so that we're not saying, okay, well, here's this piece of data, and then here's this other piece of data, and then trying to manually combine them in that fashion. So I think primarily just looking at the capacity, making sure that the meter's capacity is sufficient to convey your pumping right, or the district's pumping right, plus the additional allocation that we would be providing, and making sure that it can handle that aggregate flow. The sensitivity to the meters is low enough that on idle, I think anybody's pump would, put enough water through it that it would pass more than the low flow end. So those are some of the additional reasons that we just want to make sure that we have the proper data and it's efficient for us.
Yeah, so I think that the request was just to work with you guys before you just go purchase something So that we're making sure that the meter that's installed doesn't disrupt the operations and that, and that we understand kind of the nitty gritty details of how it's gonna work. And if it's the meter and then 2 different telemetry packages, that process that data. We just haven't had a chance to really talk with you about that in the field. So
Yeah.
the request is that we get some hands-on and make sure that we're all understanding the costs and the equipment, how it's gonna operate.
Yeah, and we've been working through those costs and we're willing to bear that for the, or at least finance it over the amortization of the meter. Because that is kind of the compromise that we've made. That helps allow the continuous pumping, which is a much lower risk threshold for everyone. Because, rather than having, 3 or 4 clocks throughout the day, we only have the beginning and the end that we need to worry about as far as the, as far as the timing goes. So we really like this model as an alternative so that it lowers that risk for everybody. And
Sure, and it might be something that the districts are interested in just purchasing outright instead of leasing it from the PUD. We just need to, like I said, the comment is we'd like another couple weeks to work with you guys on this
Sure.
one particular issue. So
Yeah.
that we're sure that the hardware and the software packages are gonna work for everybody. Not to discredit what you've done, I
Yeah,
trust you.
no. We're always happy to have a conversation. There are some things where we need to, whether there's an understanding or not, if it comes to that, there are decisions that we just need to stand by.
Sure.
But we're happy to have that conversation. We don't want to get in to the district's business. We want to just, just kind of be way in the background, and we want to be hands off. We don't want to be hands off, and that's what this allows us to do. We can just sit back and be confident that it's our responsibility that data and the numbers are being matched, and there's no reliance on the district to turn off the pumps or, record their data daily and make sure that that's in, because we also need to report that to our state.
We're all past that, believe me.
I know, I don't just,
I think it's just making sure.
Yeah.
Like you said, the big purchase of hardware and, this was the one place where we wanted a little bit more time, but feeling like maybe we could proceed with.
I think, and I agree with you, under normal circumstances too, we would have more time. We do have some, lead time, and there's some supply chain issues on this that we need to have those conversations soon. So
Yeah.
if we can do that next week or even this week, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can commit to this week, but maybe
Okay,
next week.
next week.
And maybe the application to ecology can go through. We've agreed on the total amount of water, the time, the instantaneous. And then there's an agreement that we will work out a solution to the monitoring and metering that meets PD's expectations. So we're not holding up the administrative process. With the
Right,
technical
I think the application though depends on the terms of the pumping hours and the,
Agreeing to the
they go
terms,
hand
yeah,
in
having
hand.
the interlocal in place,
So-
I think is important. We did that before, right? We did the interlocal and the transfer kind of simultaneously to commit to what the terms of the transfer would be. We don't necessarily have to, but yes, it's important to agree to all that. Check those off, right? Those.
So maybe there's a path forward that, you could just soften the language. It's a PUD approved meter, and we can work that out. This is just an attempt to have a little bit of time to deal with some technical issues.
I'll just add it. Jenna mentioned, I think last year, Ecology worked with the PUD to get an application in, and starting to be processed, but not finalized until you gave us the nod. that the
Yeah.
terms were ready to proceed. So, that certainly is an option again. As long as you know where you're gonna be diverting it from and the
Yeah.
quantities, that, you
The
know,
number of diversions.
I like that idea because then at least we'll start the administration portion of things like the water, the transfer hasn't been fully approved by us. That would still be like, we would still as a board have to approve
Right.
this agreement with the language, but at least we're getting a jump start 30 days
In
ahead
queue, yeah.
that we're moving forward.
I mean, you guys turned it around in 24 hours, I think, after we approved it last year.
and we had thankfully some lead time, and I have promised my staff who have worked on these, many years that I would not ask them to work, Saturday at midnight like we needed to in years past, if at all possible. The lead time is, I know, greatly appreciated by PUD staff and us as well. And so I think, there's certainly some mechanisms to get things moving, on our end, and then we can wait till you're fully ready. And I'll also just add, if you have even additional, maybe you're looking at 4 points of diversion, you don't know which one, you include all 4, maybe you just end up using 2, that's fine. We don't need all of those details as long as it covers the array. the
It's at least as
expansive
many
array.
as they're going to
Yeah,
use.
you can do less.
Yeah, we do all the 22 diversion points like we did before, I would think.
Yeah,
But
that would be. the
That's
extra.
not gonna hang up what we're talking about.
It's just a matter of how many you plan to use because they
Yeah.
work into the equation of the
Yep.
fee, so, yeah. You may decide to reduce the number of diversions you use if there's a cost associated with adding them.
And I think 15 is clean because it's just the one.
One.
So we're really just talking about getting together with the Fur Island irrigators on the final details of that.
Is that something you can do this week?
I'm not, you do not want to be talking to me about pumps. I guarantee that. So,
Just as far as the number of diversions that you're planning, like, if it works into the, well. I think everybody knows, right? Like, if we add diversion points, there's likelihood of adding cost to each one, so there's probably some optimal number that. The irrigators
they have
would
4.
want.
So one is covered in the 5,000 and there'd be 3,000 for if they wanted to use the additional. ones.
If,
Yeah.
yeah, so if you just decide on what that is.
And there's the cap for the GPMs.
Yes,
Well, they wouldn't be using them all at once. They'd have to
Right.
float them around.
It'd be the cumulative cap would
yeah,
stand.
it's important to put in there.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bill. I think the thought was have them all up and ready to go. You run one day, turn it off, run the next one.
Yeah, sure.
To kind of keep the reservoirs full. But I don't know. You want to?
Couple questions.
Yeah.
That's. So my name's Dave Hughes, farmer on Fur Island and the commissioner. We've been talking. This year of where our crops are across the whole section of Fur Island. And we could use 4 of our diversion points. I guess today when I started reading, I'm reading the 5,000. So I have a question. I'm just a hypothetical question on the dollars. Let's just say we have 4 diversions. 4 pumps. 4. And we can't move pumps, well, we can, but move pumps in your meters, I don't know if that's. You want to do that, so we have 4, we could probably. 2 of them at a time to stay under the 20 or 50, whatever the gallons per minute. So 4 diversions, set 5,000 for the first one and then 3,000 more. Okay,
Correct.
Positive. The next thing is, and then this probably Mark would know, because he's the pump guru. The one thing that is goes on during the season is, let's just, I'm just gonna the 10,000 gallon or the flow, in-stream flow. Is these with all the connections to everyone? If we're running that pump 24 hours, or a pump 24 hours, let's just say at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're over 10,000 CFS. This.
No.
You see where I'm getting at?
Yeah, we're not gonna come out, like, we're not monitoring, there's no alarms.
No, I guess what I'm saying is, if it goes 10,000 in, or over 10,000, is the capability there to say, hey, it was 2:15 AM, it goes over 10,000. There should be a note there, and maybe even gallons, so we're not paying,
I see.
I don't.
Yeah.
We don't want,
Yeah.
we don't want water that's in our permit
Yeah.
to
And
go
that,
towards the.
gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense, and that's what that's the nice thing about the profile, or, you know, the data that the data logger will take that in 15-minute increments, and we can, you know, skim
Yeah,
that up, skim it off.
That's something that needs.
Yeah.
That your
Yeah.
equipment or any equipment.
Yeah.
Is capable.
It's available, flows are available at 15-minute increments, so we can go back and grab that and take that off the top, and
Well, I know that's, those
Yeah.
two things I just talked about
that's important.
are gonna be the first two questions tomorrow, with coffee and everything.
Yeah,
The concept is when the river's above the flow rule, you're pumping your own right.
Right.
When it falls below, that's when you're pumping our water right. And so there's separation, you'd have to overlay what time did it happen?
Right.
And then you'd have to look at, okay, well, how much was it?
But
That's,
your meter is still gonna be reading.
Sure.
gallons, Whether it's
well,
your permit or our.
and Casey might have something to say about how they process that, but we'll be able to calculate how much water you pumped using our right based on the time in our meter data. And, I don't know if that happens anywhere else, or if that's creates any issue for you guys or tracking it.
We've done it in seasons past, so I anticipate we'll do it again. And I did want to offer, in case it's helpful, to have somebody from our staff that's well versed in the meter discussion, to have them a part of that. If that's helpful, we're happy to provide that page on that level too, to make sure water right data that the districts are reporting. We've already don't want to complicate conversation.
Right.
That's happy to.
Yeah, would think on that. I think, after seeing the farm HQ post-processing, it'll give us what we need. It is very slow. But having our own data is going to be important for future planning, and it's different than what you guys are collecting.
We may add customers to this program that aren't irrigators. That farm HQ equipment might be something that they've never heard of or ever used. So at that point, that's where our standards come in and say, okay, if you're a soccer field, if you're a greenhouse, this is what we want you to use. We're just trying to start off on that foot right now, so that we don't have to change later on when we get a different kind of customer. So. There's some other stuff in here. I highlighted in yellow some sections in the agreement. We've talked about a lot of them. One of them that we haven't touched on, we added a clause for penalties for non-conformance, which is just over pumping. It's just a blank number in there. So we talked about it internally here this morning. I don't know how enforcement happens specifically on over pumping. And so, this may be a question for Casey, but the enforcement of the penalties enforcement for something like that, in the event it happens, we don't expect it to, but how do we deal with that when it's our water right and then it's being over pumped?
I think that's a good question, George. So in general, ecology follows an escalating level of enforcement regime. And so, I would say in general, if it's a small overage, it's accidental, it is corrected. You know, this is something that's noted, but you know, you're not gonna be issued a penalty. And so ecology would really look at the specifics of the scenario and the responsible party for that.
Okay.
So if the transfer is from your water right, but you are not functionally operating it, you know, that would have significant bearing in my mind.
Maybe we can get your help in crafting some of this language to cover us. We might consult with you.
Yep, happy to do that.
Okay.
We just don't want escalation. to some-
Or do you?
Or, well, yes, or we
Yes.
do, right. We just don't want to give up our credit.
Tell me more.
If somebody else violates our water, right, say like 2 times, and then we, for some reason, violated the 3rd one.
That's
We
something
don't want
else.
it.
We don't want the 2 strikes on our record.
Yeah.
It's the risk on our rights.
Yes.
That we're trying to mitigate, not necessarily pass along any.
I certainly understand that, and that's what I was thinking when I heard Mark say it. At first, I thought I was hearing him say the opposite, which wasn't quite making sense to me, but, yes, I
We want to
understand.
reserve our strikes.
Would be in the same seat if I were up there and.
Okay. You know, the intent was to have this draft, to talk about some of the terms that are in here, have a discussion, and then after this, work on these things. You know, work on whether we create the application, submit it, get it in the queue, finalize the things that are in here, so we'll continue to work on those. Button everything down so there's not yellow highlights all the way through it. So if there's any other comments on anything that's in there, you don't have to tell me now, you can let me know, read it, let me know if there's certain clauses in there that you want to talk about or have any questions on it. And the hope would be to just have this ready to be approved at the next meeting. You know, regardless of our application process, we can do that concurrently, but just to have this agreement. I think that's important.
Oh, yeah, I think it just sounds like shoring up the metering conversation. Would be a piece. Whether it be a, you know, rent or you buy and we provide service or whatever, you know, whatever that conversation morphs into. But definitely agree that having data that works for us, that we're able to make sure that we're able to interpret it when we go to bill you, that you're not paying for, you know, you're not paying for your own water, right? It's important, so. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I think it looks great.
if there's one thing else,
So,
one thing that I could ask, if we could get a 1-pager, maybe 2, just at the.
The elevator speech?
Yes,
Yeah.
that says, hey, we're gonna run parallel processes in order to ensure that we don't get wires crossed or our dates are not aligned so that irrigators don't, so in the interest of that interrupted access. Here's the PUD's approach, and it's consistent with what we're going, so that at a very high level, here's what ecology's asked us to do, here's what we're gonna do, here's where the irrigators are on board, and so that it is, so we can just explain, here's the backstop, here's where we're gonna go, here's the
so
backstop route,
there's no gap.
seasonal, that's exactly it. I mean, I like it with timelines as they go across, you know, by seasons, so that we can make it very evident that we've done our homework and that we're all on the same page as far as, so that we don't get into that 5th week in June, you know, 'cause last year it stopped raining Mother's Day and
Yeah.
didn't start until the 4th of July, and that got messy for irrigators. And so if we look at that, and just be able to say, here we go.
Yeah, it's kind of a playbook, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a real simple high level, because this is great. This is defensible in court of our peers. However, what I really want is for us to be able to look at this and say, here's what we said we're gonna do, and we did it. Here's where the consortium came through and did what they said they're gonna do, and they did it. Ecology did what they said they were gonna do, and so that nobody's sitting there with their head in their hands going, sorry, can't irrigate. You gotta wait 2 weeks.
When was the end date of our temporary transfer for the drought? The drought's still enacted. And we already transferred.
We had a duration.
We
on
have a
ours.
duration
It's
on it.
October.
Oh, okay, it's October.
Yeah, we had a limit on how many days that
Can you file an extension under an existing temporary transfer,
If we were
under
gonna-
the same drought
If we were
condition?
gonna do, we'd need to do a new drought application
Oh,
for
okay.
this irrigation season. To answer the earlier question, much earlier in the meeting, the drought officially, the current drought declaration is set to end June 30th.
Okay.
But again, I anticipate if we are able to get an application in from the PUD, like I said, in the next few weeks, you know, I
To
think.
just go forward with that.
Yeah, yeah, the biggest thing is gonna be the public notice that has built-in required timeline, so we can get that going. That'll put us in great shape to have it processed regardless of drought declaration or not.
Processed by May 15th or processed by June 30th?
If we can get something in the next few weeks, I think we can get something in by May 15th
For non-drought.
for just a regular seasonal transfer.
Okay.
That gives enough time for the public notice period, the full 30-day and then whatever.
If we can get,
We'd be
No,
tight,
it-
right? We'd be tight.
I say few,
Three.
smaller number than a big one. but yeah.
Goes one couple few, so
Yeah.
it's 3 weeks. Good.
So we'll bring this back then at our next meeting.
We will, yeah, definitely have an update and hopefully have something
Already filed to
to
college.
take action on. Yeah, and continue to work on it between now and then. That was. Any more comments or questions, feedback?
My comment is, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Word.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Jordan, what would you anticipate the timeline being for for potential users who are not either 15 or 22 on that paper?
So we're trying to get this one done because it's simple. We've done these applications before. It's kind of like a foundation. You know, somebody other than 15 or 22 might have some additional terms in there. So we would just have to, you know, I don't want that. Well, we could work on a bunch of things concurrently. I don't know how efficient it is to do all of them concurrently, but yes, that's also a goal of ours. Will it get done on the same timeline? I'm not sure. Yeah. It's too soon to commit to something, but yeah, maybe that's something that we can talk about before you leave, Casey.
Happy to.
Anyone else? All right, with that, couple of the usual informational items. Looks like there's a news article in there. Any commissioner comments?
I just want to thank everybody for being here. Casey, it's wonderful to have you. It's so important. This is like so important to have our regulators here providing us with firsthand information on what we should expect. And just having everyone at the table is a critical element of making this successful. Thank you.
For sure. All right, I have nothing else. So with that, we will adjourn at 5:39 PM.